Greetings and welcome to our final HillCrest Wine Club shipment of the 23-24 season. We're just in the spring right now. We've got actually buds out front in the Pinot Noir that are popping in that, so we're back into the beginning of another vintage that we're excited about. But anyway, for the last shipment of the year, we have some actually new is the single term I'd use to describe it. We have our very first Dolcetto that we've produced, and many of you know that we have done other alternative, Italian varietals, Sangiovese, Tiraldigo, Barbera. This is Dolcetto, which is one of the three really beautiful wines out of the Alba region of Italy. Then we're going to do something for many years for the International Wine Club. I've wanted to do a Rioja, a very classic kind of old style. And the challenge there is a lot of those wines that are of the par that I would like are just kind of, they don't fit into that. I have something super spectacular from a very classic producer that I'm excited to share with you. And then to finish up with, sometimes I have, instead of a wine that I produce, oh, that's interesting, what am I going to call that? Sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes I'm sitting somewhere, and in this case I was sitting in Germany probably 10 plus years ago at a table listening to people talk back and forth. It was dinner at a friend's house, and to confirm the conversation they had, they would say, oh, the way we'd say, I understand. They say GENAU. And so it's a wine. I thought, oh, that's fantastic. GENAU, exactly, as the direct translation. So we have our first GENAU Riesling, which is super beautiful and is a great kind of gateway wine into the summer and summer fair and friends and all that good stuff. So to start with, Dolcetto. Dolcetto is a variety that's been grown on the West Coast for quite a while. We know that it was one of the original varieties that was planted down in California along with Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Barbera in the 1800s, and that it never got the traction of those varieties though, but it's something that's been grown here in the Umpqua Valley, we know, since the 90s. A variety that is typically grown in Piemonte area in northern Italy, where you'll see like Nebbiolo, which is the variety of Barolo Barbaresco, many times grown on the top of the hill, which is considered to be the premier site up above the fog. Nebbiolo, nebbia meaning fog, and then down in the middle of the hillside is maybe where you'd plant the Barbera, and then in the colder sites, since cold air drains and you'd have the fog at the lower sites, you have Dolcetto. Tends to ripen quite a bit earlier. It's interesting, the variety means a kind of little sweet one, Dolcetto, even though the wines traditionally made are not sweet. The grape tastes very sweet, and this has a lot to do, and it kind of plays into Riesling and a lot of wines that are made off dry or sweet, is it's really about sugar acid balance, and that grape is very low acid, so it typically tends to come across, if you're eating the fruit, as very sweet. And that is just kind of a general rule. There are areas like I talk about that hillside. Well, there are sites that are too cool because of the elevation sometimes in Piemonte that are too cool to grow Nebbiolo, that they might grow Dolcetto, where you do have acidity in that. In this area we tend to have very nice acidity. It's one of the things that brought us up out of Napa Valley, so we'll take that for a little spin. There are two styles. There's a very kind of fresh fruity style, and that's a very beautiful style. It's not really what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something a little bit more like kind of chunky chewy, and so this has black fruit to it, but has like nice acidity and has a little bit of tannin to it. This wine has a little bit of whole cluster in it, which gives you a little lift in the fruit, but also gives you a little bit of the character of the stem, which the stems, if mature, are really beautiful. So anyway, fairly dark color for Dolcetto. Dolcetto is usually kind of medium colored, but this has actually very good color. A lot of that's dry farming in that. First thing that hits me is this beautiful kind of very plummy fruit. It's a very fresh kind of plum. It's not kind of the dull or heavy side of plum, but that, along with a little bit of like almost like a strawberry, kind of like a perfume, real light character to it, but it tends to be very kind of plump. When you smell it, you sense it's kind of intense. Medium weight, but fresh. Nice acidity. The tannins, like I said, are kind of a little bit chunky, which is beautiful. I think about wines like this with like salami. When you start doing charcuterie plates and that, and you have something that's very kind of rich in terms of protein as well as fat, and that, to have wines that are kind of grippy. This wine has some nice acid, a little bit of tannin. Tends to really kind of cleanse the palate and makes you want to go back and forth one to the other. But anyway, 22 vintage of Dolcetto. Hopefully you enjoy it. Next is the Carlos Serra's 2012 So this is a 12-year-old wine. It's a Grand Reserva, which is the highest level. So within Spain for Tempranillo, typically there's the Joven style, Crianza, Reserva, Grand Reserva. Grand Reserva, there are very few of these wines made. These are wines that spend an exceptional period of time, both in barrel as well as bottle. Typically, I think it's a minimum of 5 years before a wine can be released. Oftentimes 2 to 2.5 years in barrel and the rest of the time in bottle. So really, it used to be many of the great wine regions of Europe to use the appellation, the highest quality appellation branding on that wine. Wines had to be aged for a period of time in both barrel as well as bottle before they're released. Today there's really only two very famous areas that do that. One is Chianti, of course, and Tuscany, and then the other is Rioja. Rioja, we all know we have a love affair with Tempranillo, a variety that tends to really thrive here in the Umpqua Valley. Tempranillo is a grape that by itself can be kind of one-dimensional oftentimes. There are very few 100% Tempranillos that are made both in Spain, I should say high quality, ultra high quality. It's a variety that oftentimes gets extended aging to try to build complexity in. It's one of the few wines in Europe you see American oak used. This wine's half American, half French wood. But it's oftentimes blended, and it's blended with Graziano primarily, as well as Mazuelo, which is Carignan, and we know Carignan from the Poboleda and that. Those are two varieties. Graziano, perfume to it, some nice acidity, color, but even kind of amped up more minus the aromatics is the Mazuelo or Carignan that gives wine structure, kind of beefy. And so oftentimes in the higher quality, when you get into Reserva, Grand Reserva, you'll start to see more of the Carignan, Mazuelo, as they call it, once again, blended in. The other variety I didn't talk much about is Grenache. And so there are three subregions of Rioja. Rioja Alta, that is high elevation, chalky soils, kind of protected, kind of almost like an amphitheater, kind of in a warmer area. Alveza, which is to the northeast of that a little bit, or to the east, where it's high elevation, but you get a little bit of Atlantic fluence, mostly continental, but a little bit of that weather off the Atlantic, so that's cooler, tends to have more acidity, but a little bit tighter, kind of more tannic wines. And then you move to the south, what's called the Rioja Baja. And Rioja Baja is an area that uses a lot of Grenache or Garnacha, but you tend to see that kind of falling out of favor. So this is from Rioja Alta, which is the real premier area that to a great extent was settled. We know wines have been made there for over millennia, but you really fine wine is something that began to be developed post the Moors being pushed off of the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century and that. But really the kind of the benchmark for what we call modern day fine quality Rioja today has to do with the French. And phylloxera, that root louse that was brought out of America, east side of the Rockies, was taken into Europe and wiped out many of the vineyards, including the vineyards of Bordeaux. And it had a hard time making it over the Pyrenees. And so many French winemakers, especially out of Bordeaux, went up over the mountain and went into areas like Rioja, and to a town in particular called Haro, which is one of the kind of central towns of Rioja, in the epicenter of Rioja Alta, and basically began producing wine. And so there's a very strong kind of French influence. And Carlos Serres is one of these individuals. In 1896, he ended up leaving France, going into Rioja to do wines. Once again, that blend concept, something we see in Bordeaux, Barrique, the little barrels, and that was new to that area. People brought that along with it, and especially the use of American oak. And so that developed something that is very unique in the world today. And I think one of the most beautiful things, and we try to practice this a lot with our extended aging, is what do these wines look like at like 3, 4, 5 years in barrel and in bottle and that. And because of that, Tempranillo has many different faces. It can be young, fresh, fruity. It can be young, chunky, chewy. It can be kind of medium weight. It can also be super complex and elegant. And that's the style that I wanted to really present with this. It's a very beautiful, spectacular, at this point, very kind of mature, but something that can age still for quite a while. But 2012, 125th anniversary, and mostly 85% Tempranillo, 10% Graziano, and then 5% Mazuelo. So anyway, we'll enjoy. Lighter color, kind of medium weight, still red, but just a hint of like a bricky brown. Perfumey. It's got this like sour plum kind of red strawberry jam character, which is really interesting in a wine of this age. Once again, 12 years from vintage. Very round, rich. Only right now am I getting And this wine has nice acidity. Only right now am I getting a little bit of tannin, very, very chalky, kind of a dry tannin, but super fine in character. Very, very long, persistent on the palate and that, but super, super beautiful. Just as a side note, you'll see in some of the traditional producers, they still use this gold netting. It's metal banding. This is something that goes back to the 18th century, where there's a very famous winery in Rioja called Marquis de Riscal, and Marquis de Riscal was something that was favored by the king, and because of that, many people wanted to drink that wine, and there was a lot of fraud. So the concept of this net is something that someone figured out at Marquis de Riscal, that if you took this net and you actually attached it to the top of the cork and you wrapped it around, there was no way to open the bottle and take the wine out without destroying this cage. So nobody could actually take the wine, drink it, put another wine in there and recapsule or recork it. So anyway, just kind of an interesting little history. Today we have microchips and this kind of thing some people use, but kind of a sign of the times. So with that, we're going to finish up with our GENAU. And GENAU, once again, means exactly, and it's kind of a statement of affirmation when you during a conversation and that. And I wanted to make a wine out of the Mosel. We do very specific, site-specific wines. Now, I wanted to make something just very beautiful, kind of pleasing. This is off of some old vines down to kind of right at the bottom of the steep slopes and that, in a little bit of blue slate and what's called marl, basically. Anyway, something that just kind of rich, fresh, that you can sit there and have a conversation with somebody. You can talk about the wine a little bit, but it just kind of is in the background. And so, anyway, take her for a spin. A couple things. One is like a real strong green apple, and then right on top of that is like an apricot, like dried apricot character, which sometimes comes from a little bit of botrytis, but as a complexing agent, super beautiful, but very kind of tangy in the nose. Kind of as soon as I got that kind of that apricot, it kind of salivated. Just I could feel it. Nice volume, very fresh. You get the low alcohol kind of creaminess of really nice Mosel Riesling. A little bit sour. That green apple's kind of really kicking in backsides of the tongue, but finishes very dry, almost kind of stony. It's oftentimes said that like the Mosel, it's almost like river stone. And this is said also about some of the white wines in Bordeaux, France, the dry whites, the wines of Graves, that you get this kind of like a river pebble character on the backsides of the palate. So with that, we'd like to say thank you once again for your support. Our family's dream is to produce wines in a very old classic way in an area that has incredible potential, the Umpqua Valley, and without your support, that would not be possible. So with that, I'd like to say to the genie in the bottle, to you, and we look forward to next season sharing what we do, our produce. GENAU.